Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran.
Il avait trouvé cet accord stupide. L'accord sur l'Iran était un accord conclu par des stupides. Des stupides dont la France était.
One of the most divisive presidents in history, riding roughshod over conventions at home and abroad. In this episode, Donald Trump tackles the Middle East, from the nuclear deal with Iran to bringing US troops home.
Hillary and our failed establishment have spent $6 trillion on wars in the Middle East that we never win.
Well,
It was shocking.
Its most volatile regions.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
when President Trump makes a promise, he keeps it.
He takes America to the brink of war and unveils an unexpected deal.
At ease, at ease. Let's have a good time.
Syria.
Last night, a helicopter from the Syrian government apparently dropped some sort of improvised explosive device called a barrel bomb.
Dozens of civilians were killed. Early reports suggested chemical weapons had been used. Trump broke off the meeting. He had to get to Florida, where he was due to host Chinese President Xi Jinping for their first summit.
Just a couple of them. Do you think that Assad should leave power in Syria?
I think what happened in Syria is a disgrace to humanity. And he's there, and I guess he's running things. So something should happen. Thanks, folks. I'll see you in a little while. I just want to say it's a great honor to have the President of China in the United States.
At the U.S. President's orders, 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles have hit a Syrian airbase. This strike is one of the most significant U.S. military responses to Bashar al-Assad's regime.
What I did should have been done by the Obama administration a long time before I did it. They had a big attack right after he drew the red line in the sand. They had a very big attack, and everybody waited, what's going on, and nothing happened.
5 years earlier, Barack Obama had said that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a red line. But when Assad used sarin gas, killing hundreds, Obama and his European allies failed to act. Trump didn't consult Congress or even inform his European allies.
Nous n'avons connu le jour que lorsque la frappe a eu lieu. Et nous n'avons eu les résultats qu'ensuite. Donc c'était vraiment la preuve que Donald Trump ne voulait pas être avec les Européens. Alors pourquoi Donald Trump a-t-il procédé ainsi? Pour une seule raison, montrer qu'il était différent de Barack Obama. Finalement, cette opération n'était qu'une opération de communication.
Trump's foreign policy included some eye-catching ambitions. One of the boldest was to forge peace in the Middle East, something which had eluded his predecessors.
We have in the audience a special person who's worked very hard, who married very well.
Improbably, he gave the task to a 36-year-old businessman, his son-in-law.
If you can't produce peace in the Middle East, nobody can. Okay? All my life, I've been hearing that's the toughest deal in the world to make. And I've seen it. But I have a feeling that Jared is going to do a great job. I have a feeling he's going to do a great job.
Jared Kushner had no experience in diplomacy, but in Trump's eyes, he had a useful qualification. a family friendship with the Prime Minister of Israel.
I've known President Trump and his team for many years. Can I reveal, Jared, how long we've known you? Well, he was never small. He was always big. He was always tall.
Bibi and I have known each other a long time. A smart man, great negotiator. And I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility.
At their first summit, Netanyahu made a radical proposal. For decades, US presidents had seen an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians as the cornerstone of Middle East peace. He wanted to bypass the Palestinians completely.
People realize that the real threat to that region is Iran and their aggression, and Israel and a lot of the other Arab states have a lot more in common today than they did before.
Kushner suggested an audacious move. The president could use his first overseas trip to start building a coalition for his peace plan. Trump seized on an invitation from Saudi Arabia.
Il aurait pu aller à Berlin. Il aurait pu aller à Londres pour montrer combien il était convaincu de l'utilité du Brexit. Mais en fait, pour lui, l'Europe est un embarras. C'est une concurrence commerciale, ce sont des pays qui défendent des valeurs, des principes. Donc il a voulu montrer que les temps avaient changé et qu'il allait faire de la diplomatie américaine, non pas une diplomatie de sécurité, mais une diplomatie d'affaires.
By the time Trump touched down, Kushner had personally negotiated over $100 billion worth of arms deals with the Saudis. Even the ailing King Salman bin Saud came to the airport to greet his guests.
The Saudis pulled out all the stops for President Trump.
He likes splits. When we came up and
the show include, of course, the dance of the swords.
Saudi Arabia came up with the idea of bringing. That was and I think Saudi Arabia did a very good job in bringing them all together.
This very large room that tears up with many big, huge desks.
We must be united in pursuing the one goal that transcends every other consideration. I am speaking, of course, of Iran. It is a government that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing the destruction of Israel, death to America, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this very room.
After the summit, Trump and his team made another unprecedented move, a direct flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel.
I remember taking screenshots of the video on Air Force One showing us where it says Riyadh to Tel Aviv.
Getting from certain Arab-speaking nations to Israel is not easy because they diplomatically have never recognized each other. They don't allow each other to use airspace.
Trump headed straight to Jerusalem.
We had very much wanted President Trump to visit. It was just amazing.
It was a very touching moment and action for the citizens of Israel to see President Trump putting the kippah on his head, going to the most holy place for the Jewish people. So it was a real message. It is meaning the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, it's something that is going to happen.
The US Embassy had always been in Tel Aviv. Trump had pledged to move it to the contested city of Jerusalem, an act bound to provoke the Palestinians. But they thought he'd made them a different promise at their first meeting 3 weeks earlier.
President Trump was once again a motivator, trying to get them in a room together with the Israelis and let's really talk and figure out.
His first trip to the Middle East, Trump announced he was on the verge of cracking a deal.
I had a meeting this morning with President Abbas and can tell you that the Palestinians are ready to reach for peace. I know you've heard it before. I am telling you, that's what I do.
Others on his team were less optimistic. During their meeting, the Palestinians had repeated their long-standing red lines for a deal: Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank and recognizing East Jerusalem as their capital. The White House negotiations Trump promised never materialized. Four months later, Trump was preparing to make his debut at the United Nations General Assembly.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America.
It was the ideal platform to enlist the world in his crusade against Iran.
It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime, one that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing death to America, destruction to Israel, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this room. The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me.
Europe.
What was?
Don't imagine that one country does or dismantles the agreement. This is a UN Security Council resolution.
Trump decided to go ahead with the embassy move. The Palestinian Authority severed all communication with his administration.
وإذا كان البيت الأبيض سيكون بيت المسؤولية الدولية فيجب أن يديره رجال دولة عظام وليس رجال عقارات. هذه الحقيقة. فلسطين لن تحل بأساليب رجال العقارات.
While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering.
You may recall that this was another one of the president's campaign promises.
President Trump, when he was candidate, Trump promised to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
We thank you, O Lord, for President Donald Trump's courage in acknowledging to the world a truth established 3,000 years ago, that Jerusalem is and always shall be the eternal capital of the Jewish people.
We want America to be great again.
Tens of millions of evangelicals who had helped Trump get elected were ecstatic.
And we know we have a president who wants to make America good.
Less than a year into office, their president had delivered. Having satisfied his friends, Trump now turned his attention to his number one enemy. He claimed that the Iran nuclear deal gave the regime billions of dollars to finance terrorism. The Europeans were told they had 4 months to fix it, or the US was out. They started frantic negotiations with the State Department. A month before the deadline, Trump sent a clear signal when he appointed a new hardliner.
And my feeling was, when I arrived in April of 2018, that it was long overdue to withdraw.
Desperate to avoid the deal collapsing, the French president embarked on a charm offensive.
You have not been in the Oval Office. I can't believe it. This is the Oval Office. This is where I speak.
On a d'abord découvert, excusez-moi, mais que Trump ne savait même pas qu'il y avait une négociation. Et à un moment, Macron m'a raconté qu'il a donné le nom du négociateur.
Chancellor, I want to congratulate you once again
on your election victory, fourth term in office. It's really something. Congratulations.
Europe's most experienced negotiator wanted Trump to confirm that the US would stay in the deal. Trump still wouldn't be drawn. 5 days before the deadline, he tweeted, the British Foreign Secretary had just landed in Washington.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Today's action sends a critical message. When I make promises, I keep them.
Mr. President, how does this make America safer?
Thank you very much. This will make America much safer. Thank you very much.
Trump had campaigned on a promise to put America first, including the pledge to bring troops home from costly foreign wars.
After 15 years of wars in the Middle East, after trillions of dollars spent and thousands of lives lost, the situation is worse than it has ever been before.
About 2,000 American soldiers were stationed in Syria, part of a coalition fighting ISIS. While Trump wanted them back, most of his national security team disagreed. But Trump had support from another interested party, President Erdogan of Turkey.
Suriye toprakları tüm teröristlerden arındırılana kadar bu ülkedeki faaliyetlerimizi artırarak devam ettireceğiz.
The Kurds had been America's key allies in the battle against ISIS in Syria. But the Turkish president saw them as terrorists.
I've been president for almost 2 years, and we've really stepped it up. And we have won against ISIS. And now it's time for our troops to come back home.
It was a hammer blow for the US military.
To Secretary Mattis, he just expressed his frustration.
At the White House.
Trump took me back into the Oval Office and proceeded, as he often did, to denigrate Mattis. So in a way, it was Trump, in his own mind, building the case for how he fired Mattis, which is what he liked to say. Nobody ever resigns on Trump, he fires them first. Christmas night, we took off from Andrews Air Force Base to head to an American base in Iraq. It was the president's first trip in Iraq. And
We don't want to keep soldiers between Syria and Turkey for the next 200 years. They've been fighting for hundreds of years. We're out. But we are leaving soldiers to secure the oil. Now, we may have to fight for the oil. That's okay. Maybe somebody else wants the oil, in which case they have a hell of a fight.
In the years since withdrawing from the nuclear deal, America had been piling pressure on Iran.
Yeah, we're moving forward with additional sanctions on Iraq. Good question. As you know, we have about as strong a sanction grouping as you could possibly have on any country. This drone was in international waters. Clearly, we have it all documented. It's documented scientifically, not just words. And they made a very bad mistake.
The president gathered his top advisors in the Situation Room.
I felt it was a very thorough NSC session. The costs and benefits were analyzed. It was kind of a textbook way.
Trump signed off on a strike against Iranian military targets. It was set for 9 o'clock that night.
We heard from people in the Pentagon that they're all being...
Well, at a certain point in the afternoon, everything's in the hands of the military. So I went home to change clothes, figuring I could be at the White House all night, as these things go.
As night drew in, ships were moved into position, while US bombers and fighter jets prepared to take off.
When I was driving back in, I got to the White House after getting through a traffic jam on the bridge over the Potomac River. We got word that the president wanted to speak to all of us. I went to the Oval Office. He announced that he had decided to cancel the response.
Here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead. And I didn't like it.
John Bolton resigned 3 months later. Trump again tweeted that he fired him. But Iran wasn't safe for long. At the end of December, an American contractor was killed in Iraq. The US blamed militia backed by Iran. Days later, Trump had his chance to strike back.
A rocket attack on the Baghdad airport kills Iran's most revered military leader.
Qasem Soleimani was one of the most powerful figures in the Middle East.
General Soleimani commanded Iran's operations abroad.
We knew his record of killing Americans very well.
This was an act of our first priority was to have a proper commemoration of our beloved general.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians took to the streets of Tehran to mourn.
The top military advisor to Iran's supreme leader said that America has started a war and the U.S. should expect an appropriate military reaction.
The world braced itself for war. It didn't come.
And last week, the United States once again took the bold and decisive action to save American lives and deliver American justice. And you know what I'm talking about.
For Trump, it was a spectacular way to launch his election campaign.
We need this next election so badly.
The good news is it's much easier because here I've done it all. I've achieved more than I promised.
Having come to the brink of war with Iran, Trump was still pursuing peace in the Middle East. The Palestinians were out in the cold, but Kushner was approaching a breakthrough between Israel and some of the Gulf states.
Over the course of...
Just when an agreement was looking close, Netanyahu confirmed he was pushing ahead with controversial plans to annex Palestinian land in the West Bank.
חבלי ארץ אלו הם מחוזות לידתה וצמיחתה של האומה היהודית. הגיע הזמן להחיל עליהם את החוק הישראלי ולכתוב פרק מפואר נוסף בתולדות הציונות.
The Emirates made very clear that if the annexation continues, it's going to be very...
If Netanyahu put the annexations on hold, UAE was ready to sign a peace deal with Israel.
And that ended up being the critical moment. Everybody saw an opportunity for a win.
The White House contacted me, and one of the things we had to do was use what Kissinger called...
Israel's agreed to suspend the annexation, to suspend applying Israeli law to those areas for the time being. But in the future, it's a discussion that I'm sure will be had.
Just a few moments ago, I hosted a very special call with two friends, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, where they agreed to finalize a historical peace agreement.
I learned about it from Trump Twitter.
A month later, Bahrain joined the UAE in establishing full diplomatic relations with Israel. Sudan and Morocco soon followed suit. But the Palestinians were still out in the cold. On his last day in office, the president talked about his achievements.
As a result of our bold diplomacy and principled realism, we achieved a series of historic peace deals in the Middle East. Nobody believed it could happen.
He highlighted even his most controversial decisions.
We recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
we stood up to the oppressive Iranian regime and killed the world's top terrorist, Iranian butcher Qasem Soleimani.
Yet peace between Israel and the Palestinians looked as far away as ever. Iran's hardliners had been empowered, and the country's nuclear program was accelerating. President Biden has said the US may rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. In the next episode, Trump turns to Asia in a battle for global supremacy. He makes friends with a dictator and tries to strike the deal of the century.
When he has to deal with Erdogan screaming and yelling, he suddenly...